early. Okay. We are live on YouTube. We'll go live on Facebook in a moment. We'll give everyone a chance to join us. Okay, we are live on Facebook. Just going to share this two more places. It's great to see everyone. We made it back. There we go. We were supposed to make it back last night from New York. We made it back today, this morning, thanks to New York's thunderstorms and airlines who are careless, but we are here to tell the tale. And so we overnighted in an undisclosed location on the way to Montana. And I don't say where, because this way no one could complain that I didn't come visit them. And let's see how you share that. There we go. 10:06 this morning, I already landed in Bozeman, and we're back in the saddle. I hope you got a chance to watch the third video that came out this morning from our series, the Montana Chai videos. Seth, I'm really glad.
Are we supposed to be getting an email about that, or how would we know about that?
It went out by email. If you get my Friday email, you should have got that email.
Okay.
Okay, if you didn't get it, you let me know, and we'll send it to you. Okay, I'm muting everybody. We are on all our platforms. If you asked me, and I didn't tell you yet, if you asked me to mention you for prayers at the Rebbe's Oil, I did. On Sunday around 4:30 p.m. New York, 4:30 p.m. New York time, which is about 2:30 p.m. Montana time. Manny and I had the opportunity, the great honor of entering with over 100,000 people on that day in brutal heat. So we were online for about 2 hours, and that's only because me and Manny don't know how to stay online for 4 hours. So the line was 4 hours long, but with special powers that we have, somehow we made it 2 hours long. But 2 hours was long enough. I don't feel bad, but it was a great opportunity for prayer. Then yesterday I got Manny on the bus to go to camp, and then 24 hours to get back from New York to Montana. But who's counting except for me? We are in Parshas Chukas. Let me grab a chumash here. And Chukas, you go from the juicy stories of Korach and the spies. You come to Chukas now. There's excitement in Chukas as well. There's some wars. There's some beating of nations that need to get beat. There's Moses hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. But there's also, excuse me, there's also the laws of some of the purity and impurity, specifically as it relates to the red heifer and someone who becomes impure with a deceased body. Okay, so let's start actually right at the beginning. On page 933, if you're using the Chumash that we use, the Life Chumash, 933. God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, this is the super rational command of the Torah which God commanded, saying, tell the children of Israel, they should bring you a perfectly red heifer, which is devoid of blemish and has never had a yoke placed on it. You should give it to Elazar the high priest. He should take it outside all three camps, and a non-priest may slaughter it in his presence. Elazar the priest should take some of its blood with his finger, turn so that he faces towards the front of the tent of meeting, and sprinkle it 7 times. The first thing he does with the blood of the red heifer is he sprinkles it towards the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, the entrance of the place where God meets with Moses, and he sprinkles the blood. The cow should then be burned in his presence. Its hide, its flesh, its blood, and its dung should be burned. The priest should take a piece of cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool and cast it into the burning cow. The priest should immerse his garments and wash his body in the water of a ritual pool. The priest will remain impure until the evening, and then he may enter the inner camps. The one who burns the cow should immerse his clothes in the water of a ritual pool and ritually purify his body in the water of ritual pool, and then he will remain ritually impure until the evening. So the guy preparing the red heifer, who's creating the purification for the person who became impure, he becomes impure in the process and has to purify himself. A ritually pure person should gather the cow's ashes, divide them into 3 portions. You should leave 1 portion in the temple for the priests working there, place another on the Mount of Olives outside the camp and ritually pure place for priests preparing the red cow. And the 3rd portion should be placed just outside the wall of the temple courtyard as a secure reminder for the congregation of the children of Israel. The ashes are to be added to the sprinkling water, which is used for ritual purification. The one who gathers the cow's ashes should immerse his clothes in a ritual pool and remain ritually pure until the evening. This is an everlasting law both for the children of Israel and the convert who lives with them. And then it talks about what happens when someone becomes impure from a deceased body, how you have to make sure to purify them. So you have this incredible, illogical, super rational law of the red heifer. The Rambam Maimonides says that from the days of Moses, from the first red heifer, until today, there's been 9 red heifers. Then the Rambam says, V'asiris yasa melech HaMashiach, the 10th will be prepared with the King Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, Mehera Yigala Amen Ken Yiratzeh, may he be revealed speedily. Amen, so let it be God's will. Which is very fascinating in itself. We can have a class on that itself. How the Rambam Maimonides, in his codification of Jewish law, smack in the middle of a law about the red heifer, puts in this foundational idea that that's how we are meant to live as Jews, that no matter what we're doing, it's all connected to the coming of Mashiach. Our Torah study is connected to that, so much so that he even said a prayer right in the middle of the halacha. It's not a book of wishes, it's not a book of philosophy, it's a halacha book. Mehera Yigala Amen Ken Yiratzeh, may he be revealed speedily. The Rebbe has a whole analysis on it, but that's not for today. That is what the verse says. There's a medrash, the Medrash Rabbah, and I actually took out the big art scroll Medrash Rabbah, so we can read it inside. A very, very interesting commentary on these verses in the Medrash Rabbah. Medrash Rabbah says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yeshua de Sichnin b'shem Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Yeshua of Sichnin said in the name of Rabbi Levi, Al kol davar v'davar sh'ha'omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'Moshe, regarding each and every item that the Holy One, blessed is He, taught Moshe with regard to the laws of ritual impurity, God would tell him how the item acquires its impurity and how it may regain its purity. So any type of purity and impurity, God said to Moshe, this is how the item becomes impure, or this is how the person becomes impure, and this is how the person or the item becomes pure again. But when God arrived at the passage of the Torah, which is in our portion, say to the Kohen and the sons of Aaron and tell them, each of you shall not contaminate himself to a dead person amongst his people, which is not in our portion, that's in Leviticus, right? Where it talks about how a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to become impure. Amalei, Moshe asked God, master of the universe, if this Kohen did contaminate himself to a dead person. You said in Leviticus that a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to become impure. What happens if he does? With what is his purification? Moses asked God. How does a Kohen become pure? Huh? Oh, so that you're saying red heifer. Let's see what the Medrash says. Loi Heshiva, God did not respond to Moshe. But Oisa Shah, at that time, Moshe's face turned white as a crocus. Turned white. He thought that God didn't think he was worthy of being responded to. And God's ignoring him. God's giving him the cold shoulder. So he turned white, like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Okay, that was in Leviticus, right? Okay, when he arrived in our Torah portion in Chukas in the book of Numbers, Amalek, Baruch Hashem, blessed be he, said to Moshe, at that time that I said to you, say to the Kohen and that he shouldn't become impure. You asked me if he did contaminate himself with what is his purification. I did not respond to you. Now I'm informing you that this is how you become pure. They shall take for them they should take for the contaminated person some of the ashes of the burning of the purification animal, as is discussed in our Torah portion with the red heifer. So God never told Moshe why he ignored him, right? That's up between God. God decides how to answer people. I'm not involved in that. I'm not God's lawyer, and I'm not Moshe's prosecutor. Moshe was offended, definitely confused why he was being ignored, why he was getting the cold shoulder. When it came to the next book in our Parsha of Numbers, God said, hey, remember back then you asked me about how you can purify a contaminated Kohen? Here's the answer in Parshas Chukas, in our Torah portion, where it talks about how to purify a Kohen who becomes impure, which is basically how you purify, right? We divided it up into 3 batches. One of the batches was to make a Kohen who became impure, pure. Just like you make a Jewish person who's not a Kohen pure after they become impure to a deceased body. So in 1952, a couple of years ago, 73 years ago to be exact, how do I know? I'm not such a mathematician. But my father's 73 and he was born in 1952. So as long as I know how old my father is, I know how many years ago it's from 1952. So in 1952, the Rebbe addressed this medrash, this specific medrash that I just read to you. It says we need to really try to understand what was Moshe concerned about and what was God's response to it. In other words, back in the medrash, when the medrash says that Moshe, his face turned white. I don't want to speak on behalf of Moshe or God, but I'm venturing to say Moshe must have understood that if God didn't answer him, there was a good reason. Huh? Right? You know, like in the middle of you don't get all the information, especially when you're dealing with a super rational mitzvah, right? So what was really going on here? What was the back and forth? And then Hashem comes later and says, here, now I'll tell you how an impure Kohen becomes pure. So the Rebbe addresses it. There's actually a few different places the Rebbe addresses it, and each place has its own explanations / path. I'm sticking to the one from 1952 for tonight. Everything I share with you is from 2 different talks of the Rebbe in 1952. If you want to know exactly which Farbrengens, I'll tell you it was the portion of Chukas. Actually, I take that back. It's a combination of talks from 1952 and 1950, both in this week's Parsha. And it's important to have this analysis because I think a lot of people, when we come to the portions that talk about purity and impurity, we get very annoyed. What do they want from me? Purity, impurity, touch this, you put some hyssop, mix it with water, and you put ashes, and then or if it's other types of impurity, if the clothing in the water in the mikveh, we have to kick them out of the camp. Like, purity and impurity by definition is super rational, which makes us very uncomfortable because we like knowing everything. We want to understand everything. It used to be most people wanted to understand everything. That's before politics became dogma. Politics became religion. So now people believe things in politics instead of using their brain to think. It's all about belief. What do you believe? Do you believe we should invade Iraq or Iran? Believe. What does that have to do with belief? I believe we should never have got. What do you mean belief? Why are you using the term belief? It's not faith. But that's what's happened. Slowly, the words have changed. Politics has become dogmatic. It's religious, if not cult-like. It's on the right and the left. And we substituted the words of thinking, of knowledge. So it used to be, maybe in our class, we still are in the minority, where we still like thinking. We still like asking questions. We still like recognizing when we don't have answers. And the more we learn, the more questions we have. And that's okay. That's the beauty of learning. That's all Hasidus. All Hasidus is about learning. And the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know jack. So when we were still in a world where people pursued knowledge, where people had inquisitive minds and they wanted that curiosity to know more, when it comes to purity and impurity, because it's super rational, people struggle because we have an innate yearning for understanding. And you can't really understand purity and impurity. So perhaps tonight, at least understanding the conversation between Moshe and God, it won't give us an explanation for purity and impurity, but it will help us understand some of the layers that are involved and connected to purity and impurity. And this is what he says. The deeper meaning of impurity is that there's a weakening of the person's connection with holiness. When a person is impure, it means that their system, their being, is now weakened in its relationship to holiness, which is why they're impure. When you're impure, you can't go into the community, you can't touch other people, if you touch something, that becomes impure, you can't go into the temple, right? So impurity means there's a disconnect of some sort between the person, their being, their physical being, and their spiritual essence, their spiritual core, or their holy abilities. When it comes to other forms of impurity, which are not death-related, like tsaras, like seminal emissions, like menstruating women, it's weakened, right? The relationship between the holiness of the person is weakened, but it's not gone, it's not dead. That's why you can renew it through various processes that the Torah tells us, and eventually the person comes out of a state of impurity because the bond was never severed, it was only weakened. But in contact with the death, it's a system of all the sleep body, so left in a body, just a physicality. There's nothing holy left. So there's no powers of holiness there anymore. So when you touch something that has no soul, that has no life, there's no holiness, there's no godliness. Because the entire life force is holy, but that's gone. That's why when we go to the Torah every Shabbos, or every time we read the Torah, we say a verse. After Amram does the intro, when he calls up the first Aliyah, he says, Ya'amoid, Baruch ben Avraham. Is that when he says it? Hold on. No. Ya'amoid. Which means you who cleave to the Lord your God are all alive. So when there's a person having the ability to cleave to the Lord your God, when there's an ability for holiness, even if it's weakened, it's there. So then you can rehabilitate it. Right? You can rehabilitate an arm zone. A person has a stroke. You can rehabilitate. But if the arm is amputated, there's no rehabilitation anymore. So Moshe turns to God in Leviticus and says, if this dude becomes impure to a deceased body, how in the heck are you going to bring purification to this? I understood all the other purifications. I understood tsaras, nida, zava, zav, all the various bodily fluids and things that make you impure. I get that. But a dead body, what are you going to create? You're going to be born again. There's a deceased body here that you became impure to. How can you ever recover from coming in contact with a lifeless body, which means coming in contact with the essence of impurity, because there's absolutely no life, and life equals holiness, and holiness equals life. How do you come back from going so low? Obviously, well, Moshe was so God remained silent for a while. And then God said, Zois chukas haTorah, our Torah portion. And what God was saying was, if you look at it from a logical perspective, Moshe, you're right. The minute a person comes in contact with a cemetery or a deceased person, there shouldn't be a way back. Once you hit rock bottom by coming in contact with a thing or an item or a person, a body that has no life, has no holiness, and now you have come in contact with that, which means you have contacted the epitome of impurity and unholiness, you should be done. From a logical perspective, you should be done. But that's why the first words of the parsha are Zois chukas haTorah. This are the super rational, the chukim, meaning you got to go above logic. Logically, Moshe, you're right. Logically, there should be no way back from coming into contact with the impure body. But if you allow yourself to go to a place of super rational, if you allow yourself to connect with God in the most sublime, beautiful, essential, core, super rational way, then because you've now checked in and connected to a higher vibration, it could bring you up and allow you to even purify from a deceased body. But how do you get to such a high level? Just by saying, I want to be inside. What do you actually have to do? You want me to elevate myself to a place where even as coming in contact with a deceased body, I should be able to purify myself, which Moshe was bothered by. How do you pray? Nah, can't pray your way out of this one. If prayer was the answer, then it wouldn't be ashes in the red heifer, etc. It would have been prayer. Huh? Also not. So there's two things about the red heifer that stand out. Not just in the way it's produced, but in how it plays out after it's produced. The first, where's the red heifer burned? Where do you do the whole process? No. Outside of the camp of the Jewish people. All the way outside of the camp. That's number one. Unlike any other offering. Every other carbon, every other offering is obviously brought, like you said, on the altar. The red heifer, the entire process of burning the red heifer and then mixing it with the water and the hyssop and all that is done michutz lamachana, outside the camp. That's the one thing, that's the first thing that stands out about the red heifer. The location of where it plays out.
What if there was somebody who had Sirras that was outside the camp?
No.
Would they still do it with somebody who is outside the camp?
Outside the camp doesn't mean they have to be in the same location. Outside the camp is outside the camp. He could be on this side, he could be on that side.
Doesn't mean anything.
It just means you're not in the camp. That's what it means. That's why it says the Kohen turn. And the second thing we know about the red heifer, besides for being outside the camp, is that odd thing that I said earlier, which makes it so illogical, makes people crazy, is that the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer, they purify those who are impure, and at the same moment, make those who are pure impure. It's wild.
Now, is that person that did it
Imagine I told you,
had to be do the red heifer?
no, he had to do a different type of purification. But imagine I told you that that if I'm going to give you an emergency, like an EpiPen, if someone's having an allergic reaction, I need an EpiPen. When I inject you with the EpiPen, it's going to make me stop breathing, and now I have to take the EpiPen. Makes no sense. I'm the one giving you the EpiPen. You're the one with the allergy. You're the one with the allergic reactions. I'm giving you the EpiPen to save you. Why do I, the pure guy here who's giving you the purification agent, have to become now pure for giving you the purification agent? But that's the second unique thing about the red heifer. When a Jewish person is willing, against all logic, against all self-preservation, against all self-interest, to sacrifice himself, give up on his own spiritual status, go outside of the camp, make myself impure, just so I can help another Jew become pure. When you can get to that level of selflessness, then you're holy enough and spiritual enough to become pure and bring purity for even coming in contact with a deceased person. Correct. How do you raise the vibration? So this is a key, incredible lesson about the ultimate way to elevate your vibration and the vibration of those around you, the spiritual state of yourself and those around you, is to elevate yourself to a place where you're willing to go above and beyond, even at your own spiritual sacrifice, to help someone else who's perhaps in a lower spiritual state than you that needs the boost. There's a lot of people, of your spiritual self. You always have to sacrifice your finances. You always have to sacrifice your physical exhaustion and well-being. But to sacrifice your spiritual stuff? And by the way, a lot of people are bothered by that. I should give up on my spirituality to help someone else because they're spiritually dysfunctional? Yes. The answer is unequivocally yes. It's hard. It's unconventional. It's counterintuitive. So is the entire law of the red heifer. I'm telling you to go out of the camp, prepare something to make someone who's impure pure, and in the process you'll become impure and have to purify yourself. Yes, that's exactly what God is asking. That elevates you to a vibration. We're not talking about giving up on a mitzvah. God forbid. But minimizing your spiritual comfortability, your spiritual comfort zone, to make sure another person is doing better so they can be elevated out of their spiritual dumpster fire. That's what it's about. And that's actually why it's interesting. It says in the Gemara, the Medrash, it says, when God said to Moses, "V'yikchu elecha," you should take to yourself para aduma tmima, a red heifer. What do you mean take to myself? The Medrash says, "L'cha ani megala tampara." I will explain to you, Moses, you and you only will I explain the reason for the red heifer. No one else will ever understand it. That's why we can't understand it. That's why it's super rational. But you, Moses, I'll allow you to understand it. The fact that a Jew has the ability today to elevate themselves to a spiritual place, to a vibration where I'm willing to be selfless and give up on my own spiritual comfort zone to help another Jew get out of their spiritual dumpster fire, and do so with so much illogical, just do it because it has to get done, you don't think about it, that originates in Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moses was a person that transcended self, right? It says he was the most humble person on earth. It wasn't about him. He said, "V'nachnu ma, what am I?" Right? So he created the prototype and created a reality where God can share with him the reason of the paraduma, and that was enough to inspire every other Jew to connect with Moshe Rabbeinu and allow ourselves to uplift our vibration. It's a very, very powerful thing. And it represents selflessness in all its glory. So even when you have a Jew who spiritually went and became impure to a deceased, which means they're in a place of really bad spiritual juju, they've gone off the deep end. They're dealing with death itself, which lifeless. There's no life. There's no holiness. It's the source of impurity. It's one of the reasons, by the way, when a woman has their monthly cycle, they become impure. People get all bummed about it. It's not about cleanliness. What does it mean when a woman has a cycle? That she had the potential to get pregnant. And she didn't, which means there's a potential loss of life. And every time there's a potential loss of life, it's a sad moment. So we bring purity to the impure, because anything that's lifeless, anything that takes away life, equals impurity. So first we have to know that we have to be willing to go into the depth, even to the impure, the most impure places, to bring someone back and allow them back. But then the evil inclination could come and say, why do I have to go so far for them? What is my problem? So that's why we tell them it's a chukkah. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It's putting away logic and doing it anyway. And sometimes you gotta do that. You know, there was Schwartzy, the famous Schwartzy, who used to stand at Venice Beach in California. He was one of the most colorful rabbis in our generation. His wife Olivia came to speak for us a couple of years ago here for the Shabbos Shuvah in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So he would do he was very orthodox. At his Friday night dinner table, only Jews were allowed. No intermarried. No boyfriend. It was not married. It was all single. He had single Friday night dinners. Only Jewish boys and girls. You couldn't come with your non-Jewish boyfriend and girlfriend. And what happened was, he'd have hundreds and hundreds of Jewish boys and girls, and he made hundreds and hundreds of marriage of shidduchim, because they were hanging out with Jews, so they married Jews, and he officiated by something like 1,200 weddings. I mean, crazy amount of weddings. So he would do wild things, like he wore a tie-dye shirt with suspenders, and he'd stand and he'd have his Jewish crystal ball. He did wild stuff. One of the things he said was, he had a t-shirt that said, "Girls, come light my fire." And then in small, it said something about Shabbos candles. You know what I mean? So he got them to look at the shirt and go, whoa. And then the shirt is Shabbos candles, right? So he went a little bit out of his comfort zone. That's not your typical place. But he understood that it's worth going out of your comfort zone when there's a tumas meis, when they're impure to the deceased, when they're so lifeless, they're so unholy. We have to go there and get them back. And if it doesn't make sense, that's okay. Either there's the red heifer, you do what you got to do, and you do it in a way to bring purity, and you're willing to sacrifice. But then the problem becomes, what's the number one problem in spirituality? Start feeling good about it. Psh, look at me. I'm willing to sacrifice myself to help another Jew. I'm so special. I'm an amazing person. Look at me. I'm so spiritual that I'm willing to give up my spirituality, so you become very arrogant about it. That's why the only way that people who became, you asked me before, how they become pure, the people who made the red heifer, I think I made a mistake before. They became pure using ashes from the original ashes of Moshe, that Moshe made, the original red heifer. And what did that do? It reminded them that they need to be humble like Moses. Don't take credit for being some spiritual, you got to be a spiritual warrior. You got to be selfless. You got to go and help people, even at your own sacrifice. Don't let it get to your head. Moses didn't let it get to his head because he was humble. He was simply a receptacle for godliness. Don't let it get to your head. No, well, you can have the t-shirt, but don't get excited. No t-shirt that says, "I'm the great hero of the Jewish people." Then you start thinking, well, if I'm so humble, then I'm not going to, I'll lose focus on my own spiritual well-being. Right? You have this balance. I have to be spiritual, but not too arrogant. And that's why there was always a batch of ashes saved for the generations to come. So it always reminds you where it started, what the goal is, what the purpose is not. So we remain grounded in knowing what it's about and what it's not about. And it's so easy to get carried away with arrogance or with holiness that says, I'm not going to become impure for another person. Now, let me ask you, you're sitting on a plane. A Jew sits down next to you, a Jew who never ate kosher in his life. Right? Let's say you're like me, you're upgraded to business class and they're bringing a meal. You're not eating, obviously, because it's not kosher. And the guy next to you 5 minutes ago told you his name is Rosenberg, and he grew up a conservative Jew, but kosher is not his thing. And you have a delicious sandwich you just brought from New York. You went to a restaurant, you bought a sandwich, you're about to dig in, And you know that in 5 seconds he's about to eat his treif meal, and you say, listen, Rosenberg, I want you to do a mitzvah. Not a mitzvah putting on film. I want you to eat a kosher I want you to eat kosher dinner instead of non-kosher dinner. Here's a sandwich, straight out of this great restaurant. I just picked it up in a burger or sushi, whatever. Don't eat the treif. Here, leave the treif for another time. For today, I want you to do kosher. You say, I'm supposed to do that. What am I going to eat? You'll survive. The Jewish people have gone through worse. You'll eat peanuts and whatever else they give on the plane. They don't give peanuts anymore for allergies. The gluten-free pretzels, the face, whatever.
That's going.
I want to know. That's the moment you know. Right? Not the moment where you put tefillin is obviously important, but tefillin, you haven't lost anything. You took your tefillin, you gave him a mitzvah. What about when it hurts? When you have to give up on your comfort? And if that comfort is spiritual, that's where the barometer. And when you raise that vibration, it changes everything. Suddenly it doesn't have to make sense. You don't have to be with your typical curiosity, inquisitive mind. You just do it because it's right and it feels right and you know it's right and you're operating from a different frequency. You know, Sue Fishkoff, the one who wrote the famous book in like 20 years ago called The Rebbe's Army. So she writes when she was meeting with Rabbi Moshe Feller, the senior rabbi in the upper Midwest in St. Paul, Minnesota, that she was about to leave his house or she was on the way to the airport. I don't remember the details. Someone here? I'm expecting someone. Yeah, he's coming for me probably. You can open it up for him. Huh? I never met him before, but I'm sure. If he looks like he's looking for me, it's him. So I think she was in the airport and she hears Rabbi Feller screaming and he came running because he forgot to give her her bag with her sandwich that he made for her for the trip. Now you could say, well, Rabbi Feller was just being a nice host. She needed a sandwich. This is probably true. But if anyone's been to an airport in the last 40 years, you know, there's 400 restaurants in each airport. It's pretty annoying, actually, for Jews. Chutzpah. They don't have any kosher restaurants and they sit and eat right in front of your face without any shame. But what happens? What happens? I think the Rebbe Feller also wanted to make sure that she gets a kosher sandwich. It's another opportunity for her to have kosher food. And that's where the sacrifice kicks in. That's where we really figure out where we are in the vibration. Are we big talkers? Or are we ready to walk the walk and not just to talk the talk? And that means sometimes giving up on our own spiritual comfortability. I was actually just reading on Shabbos, and I'll wrap up with that. An entire story of Rabbi Chaim Itcha Drizin. He was the first Chabad rabbi in Northern California. He was based in Berkeley and San Francisco, talking about in the early 70s. And he got a call about a Jewish girl from New York who was living with a Black Christian fellow about to convert to Christianity and move to Hawaii. And he got the call at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock on Friday morning from the family in New York. And he said, you must help us. And he's thinking, I'm going to have to drive an hour and a half and then get back for Shabbos. Got in his car, an hour and a half into the drive, somewhere near Sacramento. He asked someone, do you know, for GPS, 70s, which street, do you know where this town is? They go, this town? It's another hour and a half. So they thought it was an hour and a half, but it was really 3 hours. He says, I got it. So he went. And at that point, he realized Shabbos, he ain't going to be back with his family. He went into some gas station. He bought whatever he could find, a few items that were kosher just to survive. He made kiddush on soda. He had no grape juice or wine. My point, and it's a whole story of what ended up happening with her. He ended up spending a whole Shabbos in the house where she was staying because he couldn't go back. But think about that. Normal people don't do that. A random Jew calls you from New York about their daughter who's dating a Christian shegitz and living in Nechves 3 hours away, and I get in my car and I go and I deal with it. Like, why do I owe it to you to give up my Shabbos? It's exactly what we are meant to do. That's how you create a red heifer. That's how you purify the impure. And even if it means you become impure in the process, that's exactly what it's about. So let us internalize the ability to give to others, even when it means doing some sacrifice, being Jewish without sacrifice is nice. It's comfortable. You know, we do Shabbos, we do Friday night Shabbat, I do Yom Kippur, whatever, it's very nice. We have to ask ourselves on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, maybe on a daily basis, what am I doing that's outside of my comfort zone? That's not easy for me, especially in the service of others. When we can answer that in the positive, then we know we're upgrading our vibration to a Moses-like vibration, to a super rational-like vibration, so that we can truly be a source of purity and of purification and spiritual empowerment, which is what the world needs more and more of. Have a freilich and rest of the week. We'll see you, God willing, on Shabbos, and I look forward to seeing you back next week. Sei gesund. Thank you, Yaakov. There's none.
No ashes left.
Hidden, not available to us.
Why
Good.
would it be hidden?